Welcome back to Salon Exit. Thanks for exiting Salon Exit. Today we're speaking with Katie Eleanor, and we are in this beautiful creative space where Katie lives actually and creates from and collects all of those beautiful depictions of art, which is really nice to admire.
Thank you.
Maybe we can start straight away to how where you first steered towards art, if you remember, and also you can start from any point at your practice if you want to.
Oh well, I've always kind of made things ever since I was very young. I think with like a lot of artists. I think I spent a long time as a child like really struggling to live in reality for like really long periods of time. I was quite a lonely child for significant periods. We used to move a lot when I was a kid, so I just found this complete sanctuary in imagination and in my brain and in having imaginary friends and meeting creatures and things like this. Obviously, it didn't really affect me for like quite a long time, but kind of always gave me a slightly creative inclination. I think I noticed quite early on that my work began to take more of a narrative base to it. So then I guess when I was about like 16, 17, I actually used to shoot quite a lot of like fashion photography and portrait and kind of creative portrait photography. And I used to travel up to London like all the time. I grew up about an hour away from London, like all my weekends off school, and go and just like meet people and like try and take photos and just try and kind of expand myself. And I was a really shy person, so it was like a super significant thing for me to kind of find the courage to do, but that's how kind of driven I was to want to create things and want to like push that part of me. And then I moved to London when I was 18 and kind of have been here ever since. Mostly for photographing my whole way. I kind of developed kind of my own style and influences. I'm heavily influenced by like 19th century everything.
And that's mainly photography or everything?
Kind of everything. I would say most artists that I am heavily influenced by are 19th century, whether that is in... And also for kind of my influences, so how I kind of got into illustrating. I got into illustrating kind of out of necessity, like physically doing it, because it was because of the pandemic. But before that, all my photographic influences, like when I was like planning a shoot or a character, I never actually really looked at photographs anymore. I was only ever looking at kind of illustrations, etchings, prints, kind of reading more, or like going into spaces and just trying to like find the character in the space and like how I was feeling. And
also you were saying like going more introspective in terms of, depicting what you...
Yeah, definitely. I think I kind of... A lot of characters or stories, and they're always really like kind of like broken up stories, they're often like sentences. I kind of got influenced to know that that's okay, that a story doesn't have to have a beginning, a middle and an end, from reading a lot of anthologies and like short story collections, because they have these kind of things where they're hugely based on emotion rather than like a plot, and they kind of end in like really severe ways, and you have to kind of work out why and what the true meaning of the tale was.
You just made me think about this, how art can be a medium of overcoming stuff. You said that through art you had to travel, you had to go to other people and just create, and it allowed you to kind of do things that you wouldn't do without art, I guess. That's really interesting.
As I said, why I love photography is because it grounded me in reality. It's an art form which doesn't allow you to go so far into yourself, because at the end of the day you have to be on a set with a group of people often, or sometimes one person. I usually shoot with people, but obviously not always. But you have to be in reality. You have to physically go to places, create spaces. If I even if I'm working on a set, I have to physically go into a studio, paint backdrops, make props, whatever. So for me, as someone who for a long time actually really struggled with like dissociation and like to not wanting to be awake a lot and not wanting to kind of function in the real world, finding a way that I could do that was like super important to me. And that's kind of my personal way of how art is therapy, because it allows me to exist and function and navigate the real world. And I think for every artist, like they'll probably have a story of how art is therapy to them. But that's mine.
I just found something when I was going through your Instagram. I was really happy you have so much content on it, because I went on a nice journey.
Good.
And I found something that I would like you to tell me very briefly about, if you want.
Yeah.
And Bluebird had a tongue that tasted of bluebells, a sweet lick of melancholy that would make you sick.
Yeah. No.
Could you tell me a bit more about the bluebird,
Yeah.
the idea of a bluebird, where it came from? And
So Bluebird is kind of what I always called my creative other. I don't mean it to sound pretentious. I mean it to sound like the person that not the Katie that's in reality taking the photos, the Katie that's going into her world and meeting the characters. So Bluebird for me is like a part of myself, but it's the self that interacts with my creativity. But it's kind of in the name. Bluebird is also a moniker for kind of a certain period in my life where I was suffering with like mental health issues, and she kind of was one of the things that was really important to me at that time. So I kind of look to her as a kind of she guides me a lot, and she guides me through my creativity, because I think the reason why it exists is literally because when I have to really access a different part of my brain away from being a regular adult and doing all the things that we all have to do every day, to kind of go in and meet my characters. And I think as I've gotten older, it's definitely severed even more, because you have responsibilities and everything else,
and it helps you even more, I guess.
So it helps me have a way that I know that I can like detach a lot easier, because I can't detach the way I did as a kid. I don't just live in my fantasies anymore, because I physically cannot, otherwise I would not just be alive in a house. She's my kind of character. This kind of shoot that you're referring to is actually one of the first times I tried to depict her, and I actually shot these in my childhood home, there's this piece of woodland behind my childhood home, and for a really long time when I was a teenager especially, it was like such a sanctuary to me. It was just somewhere I'd go on my own and just walk, and it spikes up with bluebells once a year, every summer.
Can you see some of the bluebells on the photographies?
Yeah, I think in the other, so this is all the bluebells. All here.
Some color.
Yeah. So this one is this one's a multiple exposure. So it's two, I had to shoot 2 frames over the top of each other, so that's why there's 2 characters in it. So it's a bit more murky, but if you look at some of the other photos from that set, the bluebells, you can really see. So yeah, this was shot in the woodland, and yeah, this is the first time, and you kind of notice with the costume and stuff, it's quite, in a way it's kind of medical, because she's wearing this big white gown and she's covered in bandages, and
quite alerting.
Yeah, and she's blinded as well, and there's a lot of kind of rope and tying in this, and it's kind of.
So what was the artistic direction? What do you wanted to achieve visually?
Visually, I wanted to achieve something, and I think with a lot of my work, really standard visually, something that's really romantic, but kind of is a bit jarring at the same time. That's the kind of work that I really love. This is why I love the Renaissance, because everything is so beautiful. It makes your heart sing, but at the same time, there's violence and hurt, and it's like every good poem. There's this kind of oxymoron, of these kind of 2 things. So visually, I used, when I was painting them, because that's the other thing, because I hand color my work, when I get my negatives back, I get a whole new creative process, because then I have to decide what are these actually going to look like. So I went super romantic, pinks and purples and stuff, and I just wanted to emulate this kind of character to me. But the kind of tying and the blinding, these are kind of all references, I think, to what Bluebird kind of really is to me. And she isn't a fully realized character, because I don't really see her, I just kind of feel her.
It's double exposure.
She's kind of very much felt, and she's a part of me that represents the best parts and the worst parts of my life, all in one, through creativity. So yeah, that was the first time I ever tried to shoot her, and I actually shot some self-portraits in the same way. Self-portraits of me with the character. So
I think I know. It's
yeah.
like, is it the one where you behind the character?
Yeah, it's like
Okay.
very like Victorian.
Yeah. I never thought about it having this in terms of personalities kind of need to have something different to associate personality wise, in a way that you need to that the process of the most important in this being the process of kind of detaching, just the process of detaching. I always thought about it more that it's important for those two identities to be in a way to work, but I never thought about it and just about the process of kind of, as you explained, being really important. So it's really nice. The second question I wanted to ask you about how did you arrive at your current style, maybe the illustration you currently working on. That might help you with answering the question, what were the biggest factors contributing to it?
So I started illustration, so I've always drawn, but never with full gusto behind it. So I started using ink to draw when I was about 15, and that was an art class actually, and I think it was just because my art teacher at that time saw the way that I drew and saw what I was attracted to, and it's often like prints rather than like paintings. It was often illustration, but like I was really drawn to these kind of black and white kind of etchings and lithographs and prints. So she kind of showed me that I could do that through ink, through just using black ink on white paper. And I remember kind of the first thing I ever did was like copying all these old like 19th century illustrations from like Red Riding Hood books that were in like black and white, and copying them into black and white ink, like just to like learn how the pen kind of moved and things like that. So then, I kind of left it for quite a long time, but that was always in the back of my head. That's how I like to draw. At the beginning of the pandemic, so March 2020, I suddenly decided to go back home for a few months. Well, actually it was for a few weeks, but then as with everyone, it turns for a few months. And I literally just had with me like my laptop, 3 outfits, a sketchbook and some pens, and that was like it. And I was up to date. I couldn't shoot anything, but I wanted to make work. Like I was like, I have this time. I was furloughed at the time, so I was like, I have this time. How am I gonna? I've never had this kind of period of time where I can literally just create for myself, you know. So that's kind of what threw me back into the idea. Knowing that the pandemic was happening, I literally like rushed to an art shop and was like, I need pens in every single like different
What do you
way.
use for illustration?
Usually ink, yeah. So usually kind of like fine line pens. A lot of the time, like down to like 0.03 millimeter size pens, all the way up to like big old chisel pens. So yeah. So
have you ever tried working with flowing ink?
So out of the 2 illustrations that we're going to talk about a bit later, one of them is done all more rigidly, and one of them is done with a mix of rigid but more flowing ink. So I'm kind of learning. I'm still very new at this, really. So basically,
It looks like you've got years of practice.
I loved how photography was like super grounding for me and didn't allow me to just like get really lost, and like allowed me to like stay really grounded, which was really important for me as a human being. But when this happened, I didn't have any choice but to really explore illustration for the first time. And I always wanted to not consider myself, but I always wanted to become like a photographic illustrator. And I still do. Like I want to be able to illustrate books and stories, but with photography. But now I'm not as afraid of actually being an actual illustrator as well.
Your art itself helped you with your art practice?
Yeah,
if you know what I mean.
It allowed me a lot more freedom, because it allowed me to then just be like, okay, well, I can't do this one practice that, you know, I've kind of built my own form of micro success from. I have to kind of do something else, and it forced me to do it, and I don't want to say that the pandemic had silver linings, because that's just not true for, you know, everyone on the earth. But that was my takeaway in the most positive way, is that it allowed me to do something that I wasn't allowing myself to do before, because I always thought photography was, you know, the thing that I could, you know, that I was. And I kind of have learned over the past year that it's actually more important in any way to be a multidisciplinary artist, because I think one practice informs the other. I think my story or my storytelling moved very quickly into illustration, because all of a sudden I could use the same brain that I used for photography, but with zero limits, because everything you do in photography is limited by what you can actually physically achieve in reality. If you can't set up something, because my images all exist in, are all kind of digitally put together, it has to exist in reality. So if I can't be in that location or with 20 people, I've always wanted to draw piles of body, photograph piles of bodies on top of each other, but I've never found a group of 20 people that all want to get naked and climb on top of each other for me. One day, hopefully.
Sounds amazing.
But in illustration, that's not an issue. I could dream up anything that I wanted, and I used to have a routine to it because I needed it, but I used to have a routine. I could dream up anything I wanted on a Sunday evening, and I could finish that piece by a Friday morning. And that was an insane freedom. I loved that, because normally...
You fulfill yourself.
Yeah, it was really fulfilling, because anyone who knows me or has worked with me, I don't work slowly, but it takes time. My process is quite lengthy because it's all hand. It takes time to bring, and they're not insanely elaborate, but there's production, so it takes time to kind of put shoots together, and it can be over 6 months, whereas this is 4 days.
It's actually quite funny how people probably usually think that photography is something just click of a button, but now you just explain how big of a misunderstanding it is.
I think that's why I know, obviously, I love the fact that photography is so accessible to people. I really do.
And photography.
I just think it's two different things, to be honest. I think, everyone takes pictures and everyone should love that and enjoy that and do whatever they want with it. But and then, there's a whole different practice to it, which, luckily now is more accessible in itself, which is wonderful. But I definitely,
It's something different to follow an idea and then to just spontaneously, expressively take
photos. I mean, it's the idea of, just making something that's hyper subjective and literally creating everything from scratch. I think I look at a photographic frame in the same way that I look at an illustration. I look at...
I noticed that there is the structure of your illustrations. It's so well structured, and it has so many different details just added so effortlessly. And this is what I meant when you translated your photography into illustration so easily, that you saying that you started quite recently, just going into illustration. With
I think the main thing that links for me my illustration to my photography is this annoying obsession to micro detail, where with an illustration, I definitely want to always balance the composition, but I want them to feel quite busy and full, and it involves taking patterns down to the tiniest little detail. And with photographs as well, when I'm painting and colouring, I keep going back and back and back, because I keep being I need this thing to be, or in a costume I want it to be quite elaborate, or lots of detailed pattern texture. So my whole life in pattern, because it makes me really happy. But then bringing that, I could literally see that between the two. I kind of illustrate things that I wish I could shoot but never could, or might be able to at one point.
Yeah,
that'd be fun.
Will.
One day I could recreate them all.
What role in your maybe just general practice does pattern play actually in?
Pattern is just a really instinctual thing for me that I just love. Pattern. I love busy. I'm a maximalist. I think it comes from my love of historic buildings, I think, first. Everything from cathedrals down to kind of
Rococo.
Yeah, Rococo style to kind of medieval castles. These buildings, this kind of idea of opulence and regality is just something that fascinates me. Yeah, and it just is really stimulating to me on the eye. It makes me feel really excited.
Does it have any other kind of psychological, is it calm you think? Because it's repetitive.
I think maybe. I also really like dissecting patterns, and it's something that illustration has made me do more than obviously photography ever has, because when I'm drawing pattern, and I can be doing it for like 12 hours straight, one pattern, but to kind of come up with that pattern, I then kind of go through a lot of kind of old books of like engravings, of like patterns, also a lot of like architecture books of like Gothic architecture, and kind of look at windows and stuff to find shapes that I like. But once I come up with that pattern, so I have to really think, and then I look at a lot of patterns, obviously, as well. And everything again from like the interior of buildings down to like William Morris to whatever, and I have to, and just like the shapes and the way they kind of sit together, and it's just something. And then I notice when I'm in it, I am like really obsessive about every single detail, and if you look at my patterns closely, they are a mess. Like honestly, I hope to get better at it over time.
The representation of what you...
Yeah, but at that point, they feel really like, when you're halfway through a pattern, it feels like so... But when you finish that pattern on like a garment or whatever I'm covering in the pattern, and then I step away from it and look at the illustration as a whole, it just like sinks into it, and you don't notice every line's a bit wonky or everything. So I kind of think that's pretty...
That's the human touch of it.
Yeah, it's almost
repetitive.
No, but yeah, it's repetitive. It's never going to be perfect because it's done by you.
I mean, it's perfect because it's done by you. It wouldn't be perfect done by a
by a machine. It just wouldn't have the heart behind it, I guess. I mean, if I made the pattern and then printed it, that's a whole different thing. But in general.
Yeah, that's why when we look at maybe like no jewelry or stuff like that, when it's really meticulously created, you always admire more the intricacy of it. You see at it and you say, oh my God, how much time they must have spent on it, or the pattern. Even though if you look really close, you can still see small misalignments, or it still has this this impact, and way more. It still has more impact than modern stuff. Maybe we can go to the third question, being one of your recent illustrations, based on the Mathilde Blind's illustrations created alongside a project that you're working on currently, which is We Met as Strangers. Could you tell me a little bit more about this?
Yeah, so kind of coinciding with everything I was saying about starting illustration in the first place, that all kind of came from the same period. This all happened in about a week when everything was going a bit crazy. Me and one of my best friends, Dr. Marianne Saunders, recent PhD. We used to live very close to each other. She's an art history writer, and our kind of one escape out of the house every day is that we would go for a walk together, and I would always take her to my favourite cemetery in all of London, well, all of the world really, which is the Islington and St Pancras Cemetery in Finchley, which was was at one point the biggest cemetery in the country. It's one that not many people know about or talk about. It's also called the Islington and St Pancras Cemetery, even though it's neither near Islington or St Pancras.
Is it just a bit of it survived from the time it was first made?
No, it's like really, it's massive. Yeah, it's huge. It's in Finchley. We went, so it's my favourite place. I used to go most days and just get lost in it, honestly. And we went together and we looked for the grave of Pre-Raphaelite artist Ford Madox Brown, who's buried there, and it took us a really long time, but we did find it. And then we were just walking near where he's buried, and we saw this other grave that's kind of covered in these kind of Pre-Raphaelite faced angels, and we just saw the name Mathilde Blind on it, and we were like, who? And it said like poet. I think it was like poet and writer or something to this effect. And my friend Marianne actually was really I was really entranced by the visuals. She was really entranced, like, who is this person? I need to know. The art historian in her, really. So she did some cursory research and found out that the reason why she was buried near Ford Madox Brown is because they actually knew each other. They were potentially having an affair at one point. But we started reading her work together and we started learning about her. And she's not someone that's had a lot of kind of research done on her. I think there's like one book, basically. And we started reading her poetry together. And I'm quite poetically dense, I will admit that. But I really enjoyed reading her poetry. It is really beautiful to kind of physically read aloud. And we started to find a lot of solace in it, and we just decided together we were just really interested in this person and her life as a potentially queer immigrant artist in the 19th century who lived near where we live at some point. And
sharing a space in
space in time.
In time is so interesting.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, you know, they're literally in front of us, and yeah, it just felt like a really big moment. And the reason that it's called "We Met as Strangers" is because it's us meeting her, and it's the name of one of her poems.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, it's cool. And the poem goes, "We met as strangers on life's lonely way," etc. So during lockdown 1, we did a really we did a project where literally I illustrated a different poem every week, and Marianne researched and wrote about a different poem every week. And we did this for about 3 months, like really solidly. And since then, we're still working on it very much in the background. And I'm about to do another, at least like a 2-year kind of stint making work for it. Hopefully one day turn it into something. But I really love illustrating the written word. It's what I've always wanted to do, and finally I feel like I have an outlet to do it with. So this is how so this was the first illustrations I ever did were for We Met as Strangers.
Maybe we can do round 2 on your finished book.
Yeah, exactly. So hopefully in a couple of years
that'll be nice.
There'll be something.
So the first illustration based on the header on fire. Could you describe some of the elements in it?
Yes, the this illustration is for this epic poem called The Heather on Fire. It's split up into 4 parts, so there are going to be, because they're not all finished yet, 4 illustrations for it. And the opening section, it's based on the Highland Clearances, which happened in the mid-1800s in Scotland. And basically the way it kind of starts out is with this section, I'd say, which... Basically, the whole kind of battle here is the peasants versus the landlords. So I kind of wanted to do an illustration. This whole first section is just kind of setting the scene, I think. I kind of wanted to set up these elements. So in the foreground, I have these 2 lovers, which are, this really joyful part of this whole thing. But it's quite an ominous scene. There's this big castle in the background, and this was kind of my... Because the landlords aren't really mentioned about, but there are all these lanes talked about going up to these like manor houses. So I kind of wanted this like ominous background of these kind of forces which kind of are there, and they're eventually gonna come. Yeah, and like the flying ship that I kind of drew as well, because this is kind of also in the time there's new technologies, there's new forces beginning to come in. Something that happened massively in the 19th century that are trying to kind of disable these kind of regular farming settlements.
I actually kind of notice it right now. I mean, it's obvious thing, but at first I was treating it quite flat, but now I kind of see the depth of it, and I can feel the distances in between those 3 elements, and then now it's so obvious and so strong in the depth of it, so it's beautiful. I wanted to mention this.
Yeah, I definitely form compositions. I think of them as like Victorian paper theatre, which is something that I've been obsessed with through photography for like a really long time. Like
what is the Victorian?
So it's kind of toy theatres from the Victorian era. So it's basically kind of a theatre made out of kind of cardboard or paper that are really elaborately painted, and all the characters and all the scene is all made out of paper, and it's all in layers. So when you look at it from the front, it's like this really complex scene, but if you look at it from the side, it's just like layers of paper basically. All the way through. So the way I kind of form it is I kind of think, in terms of kind of like a theatre set or a theatre stage. I wanted your eye to first be drawn to this kind of scene of these 2 lovers dancing, but then behind them are these kind of forces which will eventually sadly come.
Okay, beautiful. Maybe we can move to the main feature of this episode, the painting, the illustrations of a title. What's the final title? Untitled yet.
It's untitled at the moment.
It will be titled.
It will be titled very soon. But this can show how fresh this is in my brain, because it's kind of just finished. I finished the whole thing.
So it's usually, how does the process of titling your work roll out to you in
always afterwards.
Always
so that's the
afterwards.
thing for me. Sometimes I don't come up with the title until I have to, and then I'm like, oh god, I know what direction the title should be, but
what's the reason you created?
Yeah, I understand all these things. It's just the words are really important to me, and I think they really represent the way that the work is viewed. To be honest, I think maybe it's just me that I will really judge. One of the things I judge about work is the way that it's titled. So I never like to do something untitled. Oh, I have done. But if it's like a study, but if it's like a finished work, then I won't because. But it might take, it might be another week.
In this illustration, the elements are much closer to each other. Is there reason for it? Is it more kind of, because you said it's more personal and chaotic?
Yeah, so this is one of 2 illustrations that I'm working on. This is the one that's finished. There's another one that's going to be finished. These are the first illustrations I've done purely for me and not for any project or anything else involved. So I got to kind of think a lot more loosely, and I kind of went about it the same way I go about like my photography in a way. It was, more about characters that haunt me, but I don't mean that in necessarily a dark way. I just mean like they're always kind of in the back of my head. And I did want to do a more chaotic scene, and I think the longer I've been illustrating, it's been like a year, but like, the more drawings I do, the more chaotic they kind of become, the more, and I think...
Why is it?
I think that's just me being able to be a bit more technically ambitious. And just seeing something and just be like, no, more. Maybe that's the maximum to me, just going more. Yeah, and just also being like, more detail, more character, more this. How can this be something that isn't just regular? But then also balancing that with, there is an element of too much. But I think with these especially, I've just really just been like more just adding things to them, like constantly. Like when I was designing them, it was just like trying to fill up everything. And I think the kind of motifs that I picked here, it is this kind of almost like a heaven and hell kind of motif, this kind of climbing of the trees up through these kind of deranged looking angels.
It almost has this kind of Bosch composition wise and like a mix of different kind of scenes in itself.
That's why I kind of liked all these kind of crazy emotions. I think this also goes back to my really big infatuation with like tableau and these like big tableaus and wanting to create tableaus more and more in photography. And hopefully I will be able to now do that in the next like couple of years. But being able to then do it in illustration with no holds barred, I can make any creature I want, and I've been really enjoying that because
they're so creative.
There are so many creatures that I've wanted to do in photographs using people, but like crazy costumes and stuff. But like, how is this possible? Is this really like, can I afford to even make half the things? But with this, I'm like, I want a pile of demons, and I can draw a pile of demons. So
how'd you go with them? Stupid question.
I think honestly with this one, the first thing I wanted to do, I wanted to do the piles of angels and demons. That was like the first thing. So I kind of started, I think the first element I designed was this guy here. And I knew I wanted, literally compositionally, I wanted it to be kind of longer and thinner than my other illustrations. So so I'm really obsessed with like white birch trees, and I really love drawing them because they just really carry like a whole thing together. Just the lines, and a lot of my work is line based, and they're really really satisfying lines. So I really wanted this kind of forest to carry up from this hell scene to this heaven scene. So so I started drawing demons, and then I started placing kind of in my head where I wanted the trees, and then I was like, oh, why don't I start putting the branches coming out of the demons, and they're like in the soil, and it was really organic, to be honest. Like, I think with a chaotic scene, it kind of has to be. You kind of have to draw one, and then how is that one interacting with this one, and how's that interacting with this, and how's this element, blah blah, and you have to go back and revise it and rub it out and start again. So the design element of it, was very lengthy, but I really enjoyed it. It's helped me feel a lot more ambitious, I think.
It has this feeling of just shooting to the sky, whilst being enclosed in this foresty contraption of a scene.
It's kind of
beautiful depiction of chaos.
Yeah, it's just chaos, and it's also I think.
But also, it's the compositionally, it's quite closed.
Yeah, it's very like close. So, yeah, it kind of, in a way, it's how life often feels like to me. I don't know, maybe that's just living in London. That it often feels like very
something happens
close.
And you don't live it for like years.
Yeah, close, and never really having that air to be. And also my brain, to be honest, this whole illustration is based off kind of characters and things that I meet when I get forced to fall asleep without any kind of background noise. Yeah. It's this kind of moment between like deciding to go to sleep and falling asleep where my brain goes absolutely haywire, but not with reality things often. And it's chaos, and it's like I feel like my brain like vibrating, and it's infuriating to me. So I usually have on some kind of music or something in the background, just quietly. It just really helps me tune out very quickly.
Like the patterns. Yeah,
it's I think maybe the things that I stimulate my brain with, they're just not very evening friendly. Yeah. So I find it hard to like shut down again, even though I try all the ones.
Maybe allow you to put your thinking on a like a path.
Yeah.
More structure.
And once I'm in the kind of creative head, so often I work till quite late on my whatever I'm working on, artistic pieces. So I think I find it quite hard then to get out of that head and back into like regular head who needs to go to sleep. So yeah, this is why it feels like chaos, and this is what it feels like. It's quite like, it's not necessarily a good, I don't think it's a good feeling. This is why I avoid it at all costs. But you know,
it's good to put it onto something, to visualize it.
It's a weird feeling that I would never really concentrate on that much.
I really like that you mentioned the idea of chaos, or like portraying or finding chaos in closed space. I always thought about chaos being unbounded. For example, London being a chaotic space, but still enclosed by borders, and psychological borders, and any type of borders. It's something profound and interesting. Oh, actually, that might be one of the last questions. How do you decide on whether to use color, any type of color illustration? There was this one illustration with gold, I think, in it.
Oh,
like
yeah,
yellow.
it is, yeah.
Is it?
That was okay. So that. Yeah, I mean, you can do. So I probably will never use colour again. That was the one time I tried to. Okay, so maybe I haven't evolved that far in my practice that I will, because I also love colour illustration. And I think the way I would colour my photographs would be how I colour my illustrations. But then I think the shapes that I have for my illustrations wouldn't necessarily match. But I haven't tried it. So maybe it will come. Maybe I'll do a Bridget Riley and move from black and white into colour at some point. But at the moment I'm really set on... It's very different to me, because I think all my photography work is really based on colour. As well as form, but colour plays a huge part in it. Whereas my illustration work is going to play much more heavily on shape. So I kind of like having an outlet to really think about these two things really differently at the moment. But again, this might change.
What if it's going to be like with the illustration itself? At first you said you started like little, slow.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Then you just like
So
expanded
it could absolutely be something. But I also, I really love like print making. All these things which really exist wonderfully in black and white to me. Whereas wholeheartedly, no, it's not true. Okay, no. I think colour adds a lot to my imagery that doesn't happen when they're black and white. And I think, so maybe. I cannot say. But yeah, that was a go, because I love gold a lot. So I kind of wanted to add some like real elements of gold ink to it. But I saw it as a massive failure. So not for now, but like we'll see how it goes, I guess.
Okay. So maybe for the last question, I might ask you something that you can answer in any way you want. You don't need to think about it too much. What do you think is art?
It's really hard to not answer in a massive cliche.
Yeah.
I think art is probably, for me, art is an object, usually. I think, personally, I find... No, that's a lie, because then you have performance.
Oh, you started so more cliche. not cliche.
Yeah, it can't be true. But okay, personally, it's
Experiencing.
being able to take an experience or a thought or a fantasy and being able to make something tangible out of it.
Mm.
So I think there's a process of taking things into your head, sorting them out, and then putting them back out again. Whether that's in music, words, film, photography, printmaking, illustration, whatever. It's a subjective way of looking at real events, but it's also a subjective way of, well, even more subjective way of kind of looking at emotions and things which everyone experiences. I think we're all more similar than we like to pretend.
Yeah, that is something I've been thinking about
we're
recently.
massively similar as humans. Just our life experiences are different, but
and people don't realize how similar as a human being we are.
I think
we're basically the same copy of something that's,
One thing I loved is when I had a job where I was around art all day and I'd be around the same pieces and I'd be talking to people about it, and I was horrified because over the space of like 2 years, I literally just heard the same people different people looking at the same work, having the exact same thoughts without, just the exact same train of thoughts, but feeling, because they're, really interesting. But I think the way our brains work and react to things is very similar. And I think art shows your individuality, I think, a lot of the time, because the way you can get those things back out again.
Yeah, like snowflakes.
Yeah, it's completely profound. Like, I love it. Yeah, that's what I see. I see a lot about somebody's way of thinking through either the way they create or what they create. It can be both.
Nice, well put. So thank you very much for your time, for wasting your time.
No,
precious
I loved
time.
It was great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.